David, give me a thumbs up, or Sonia, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up. There you go. Okay. Got the whole hand. Okay.
Yes, you can be
Thanks.
heard. You can be
Thanks.
heard.
Okay, great. So yes, our host is somewhere out there in the atmosphere and keeping everything the way it needs to be. So hello to everybody. Welcome back. We were away for a bit and we missed you. I hope you missed us. And we're gonna actually next week, next Thursday night is Hanukkah, and I think really it's not a good time to have a share because people will be busy with hopefully around the Chanukiah lighting candles. So I think we will not meet next week when it's Hanukkah, but we will God willing, in 2 weeks, we'll meet again. But I thought because we're not meeting next week, so we want to say a few words about Hanukkah, and I want to explore an interesting topic with you, and that is Yosef and Hanukkah. As you know, we are reading this week in the Parsha and really continuing essentially until the end of the book of Breshit, reading about Yosef in many ways, Yosef is what I would call the fourth Av, the fourth patriarch, because if you want to determine who qualifies on the basis of how much text is written about that individual, Yosef makes a strong case, may even be number one. I think Yaakov probably ranks number one in terms of his mention and Sukkim devoted to him, but Yosef would be a close number two. And since there are four imahot, we want to be symmetrical and have four avot. I would vote for Yosef to be the fourth, since Esav, of course, lost that opportunity due to his behavior. Otherwise, he would have been the fourth of the avot. In any case, I want to talk about the subject of Yosef and Hanukkah. Now, it seems this to be really a stretch, an improbable stretch, because what does Yosef have to do with Hanukkah? They live many centuries apart, and on the surface, they don't seem to have anything in common. Long, long before there was a Hanukkah, there was a Yosef. And maybe if he had a bit of prophetic uh, wisdom, he may have seen in a vision that someday, many years after he's left the scene, there will be a Hanukkah. But things are not always what they seem to be. So, as strange as it sounds, this idea of linking Yosef to Hanukkah, there are a number of authorities and a number of sources that make a case for it. First of all, the story of Yosef always coincides with Hanukkah. The primary story of Yosef spread over at least three parshiot in the Torah, so it always comes out during Hanukkah. Is this a coincidence? I don't think so. We have this idea that events that occur in the calendar are very often linked to the subject being addressed in the parsha as well. A good example of that is the death of Aaron HaKohen. I think it was this past year. Aaron died. His yahrzeit is Rosh Chodesh Av. It's the only yahrzeit that actually is written explicitly in the Torah, and it's generally in the parsha, usually Chukat, where we talk about the death of Aaron. That's when his death occurs. So here we are reading, and I think it was this past year, it was actually on that same day that he died on a Shabbat. That's when we read in the Parsha about his death. And there are many other such examples. So it could very well be that because we read about Yosef every Hanukkah, there's a connection. And then there's something else that um, is a little bit telling and a hint. Sometimes we don't get this explicitly, but we get it by way of a hint. Now, Hanukkah does not have a separate book of the Talmud, does not have a Masechta devoted to it. Other holidays do. Rosh Hashanah has one, Yom Kippur has one, Yuma, Sukkot has one, Purim has Megillah, and others as well, but not Chanukah. Nevertheless, Chanukah is discussed very briefly, those who are familiar with the Gemara, in the Gemara of Shabbat. And there we have a relatively short synopsis of the Hanukkah story under the heading of My Hanukkah. Why do we celebrate this holiday of Hanukkah? And Shabbat seems to be an appropriate place for it because on Shabbat you're also talking about lighting Shabbat candles. So you can talk about lighting Hanukkah candles or Hanukkah lights. But in the mitten derinim, as we would say in French, or I mean Yiddish, without any seeming reason, the Gemara interjects and makes the statement, connecting it to another statement made by Rav Kahana and another rabbi, and just says the pit in which Yosef was thrown was empty. As the pasuk says, it was empty, there was no water in it. And the Gemara says, okay, there was no water in that pit, but there were snakes and scorpions. Now, it seems clear to me this is no flippant or offhand remark, but it seems to be a hint linking together the story of Yosef and the story of Hanukkah. Now, there are some obvious connections here, first of all, between these two individuals or these two subjects. First of all, the brothers must not have known that there were snakes and scorpions in the pit into which they threw Yosef, because that could be fatal. And they had already decided they didn't want to directly kill Yosef. And therefore, the rabbis say it must have been a very deep pit. And since the pit was so deep, more than 20 amot, 20 cubits, they connected that to the halacha of Chanukah, where you cannot place your Chanukiah so high, so far away, so that others cannot see it. And they say if you placed it as high as that pit was deep, then you would not fulfill the mitzvah. You couldn't make a bracha on the Chanukiah because there is this issue of Pirsume Nisa. We're supposed to be publicizing the miracle of Hanukkah. And to do that, we have to put our Chanukiah where others can see it. That's why we light it at a time when there are people around, and we try to put it in either in the window or outside so that other people can see it. In fact, that's why it is even permissible if you don't have a Chanukiah, although you can't make the bracha lahadlik ner shel Chanukah, because you're not lighting it, but you can make the second bracha, which is talking about the miracles that occurred in the Hanukkah story. So one connection, it seems, is that the pit in which Yosef was held, into which they threw him, also has a connection to this halacha of where you can light your Chanukiah. Another connection, perhaps to explain this very mysterious Gemara suddenly injecting the story of Purim into the laws of Hanukkah, is that Yosef later in the story, he returns to the pit into which he was thrown when he is now at the near the end of the story, where he has already been made the viceroy of Egypt, and he is going to the burial of his father Yaakov. And we're told that on the way back, he stops at that pit into which he was thrown, which started this whole, of course, this whole series of events, these unique and extraordinary events by which he rose to the power, second power in command in Egypt. And so he stops at the pit and he makes a bracha there, and he blesses God. He says, Sha'asa li nes b'makom hazeh. Blessed is God who performed for me a miracle in this place, because of course he was not killed in the pit. He was saved from the snakes and scorpions, and he was taken as a slave, and we know the rest of the story. So he makes this bracha, which is very similar to the bracha that we say on Hanukkah when lighting Sha'asa Nisim Lavotenu. using almost the same words. Also in the pit, Yosef was surrounded by darkness and existential danger and in need of divine rescue. On Hanukkah, we also face danger with the danger of Greek rule over us. The Greeks are regarded in Jewish literature and the Talmud as the source of darkness because we have mitzvot of light and they have rules and customs of darkness. And we were saved by Hashem, and so we light candles to dispel the darkness of despair as well as the darkness of winter. So there do seem to be some ways that you can make a connection between Yosef and Hanukkah. But I want to go really deeper than that. Not into the pit, but deeper into this discussion about Yosef and Hanukkah. Well, the Gemara asks, "My Hanukkah, what is Hanukkah really all about at its source?" And I have to say, I've always been quite amazed by the universal Jewish love and attraction for Hanukkah. We are celebrating this great victory over the Syrian Greeks, and we're taking pride in the Maccabim and the Maccabees. And, Israel loves that theme. We have sports teams, Maccabi Tel Aviv, the most famous of the basketball teams. We even name our Olympics the Maccabean Games. So we're really connecting to this idea of the Maccabi, someone who is of extraordinary strength and prowess, etc. And I understand why people connect to that because everybody likes a winner, and it's just a kind of a natural thing to have this adulation for the heroes of the Hanukkah story, Yehuda HaMaccabi and Matityahu, etc. But we forget in that kind of, you should pardon the expression, idol worship of the Maccabim, of the Hashmonaim, that there were two wars that were fought in the story of Hanukkah, not just one. While the second battle was external, the first battle was internal. It was a battle between brothers. It was a civil war of sorts, the war of the Hellenists, those people who wanted to adopt Greek customs, and the Hashmonaim, or the purists. And there had to be a fight that took place against a growing wave of assimilation as more and more Jews were adopting the Greek mores, the Greek clothing, the Greek language. There's even a very strong prohibition and warning about translating the Torah into Greek, the Septuagint, as we call it, which was something that the rabbis were very, very negative about because, in other words, it was trying to even remove the Hebrew and replace it with Greek. So this was a spiritual battle, but it manifested itself in mortal combat, in physical combat between the two parties. So the first shot of the war, so to speak, was when Matityahu, who was the spiritual leader, who was the Kohen Gadol, he finds a Jew who is slaughtering a pig on one of the elevated places of a bima that normally is reserved for sacrifices and offerings to God. So, of course, he doesn't take very well to this. He's quite enraged, and he gets himself a sword and he kills that Jew for the insult, perhaps even more than the crime of what he is doing, this idea of, in effect, lampooning the Jewish custom of offerings and turning it into something that, using a pig, obviously is going to lean towards the Greek side, saying we now can have our own rituals and our own laws. So that begins this fight. So we know Matityahu is five sons, the Maccabim. They lead the charge against the Greeks until ultimately they're able to eliminate this Hellenistic aspect of the Jewish people in Israel and prevent their more total assimilation. And there are many stories about what takes place, but all of those stories essentially have the same theme. Elazar will give up his life and die because he refuses to eat treif. By tradition, they serve him pork, and he won't eat it. Chana and her 7 sons, we know about them, that they will not commit avodah zarah by bowing down to Antiochus, or even when he drops his ring in a kind of ploy because he's embarrassed that he can't get anyone to bow down to him from the family. He says, just pick up the ring. But no, Chana says to her youngest son, don't pick it up. It's going to appear as if you're bowing down to Antiochus, who made himself into an idol, who had an idol with him, etc. And we see that this represents this idea of we definitely reject Greek culture, and we understand it's going to undermine our nation if we take upon ourselves any of these laws or any of this behavior of the Greeks. And therefore, even when we find oil and we take back the Beit HaMikdash, the oil that was made impure by the Greeks, we say we're not going to use that. It's only the miracle that we find 1 jar of pure oil that was not tainted by being used by the Greeks, that we allow ourselves to relight the Chanukiah, and of course have this symbolic and popular miracle of the oil burning for 7 days, for 8 days, to dispute whether it burned uh, ma magically or miraculously for 7 or 8 days. But the Kohanim understood we cannot have anything to do with what the Greeks have touched. So the entire symbolism of Hanukkah is reflecting this struggle to maintain purity of spirit, rejecting the dilution of Judaism and Jewish law. So the Chanukiah, we know, although many people popularly use candles for it, but the custom is preferably to use oil, especially olive oil that is pure. It represents the purity of Judaism and our refusal to dilute it. But also, oil does not mix with other liquids, it remains pure and unadulterated. And that's why we prefer to use oil. It symbolizes the fact that we cannot mix. We can have connections, we can have business relations, even friends of non-Jews, but we have to be careful about mixing too closely. And that's symbolized clearly by the oil. Now, it's interesting to note that we did not employ the heter, the permissibility that's given by the Gemara in Gemara Psachim that says Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. There's a principle that says if everyone is impure, nobody is impure. That if the community is in a situation where nobody's in a state of ritual purity, of tara, then we can still go on and, in a sense, say that, it's kind of like where everybody in the Sanhedrin votes to convict somebody of murder, they're freed because you can't have a situation where everybody is voting against them. Here, it's a situation where if everybody is tamei, then in a sense nobody is. But um, the Kohanim rejected it because they wanted to send a message that the moment you start to water down Judaism, so to speak, there is no end to it. And as the saying goes, either you stand for something or you fall for everything. And so they decided, no, we're not going to use that tainted oil, even if there might be halachic permissibility, in order to show that we're going to be very, very strong about this, that we're not going to mix our culture with their culture. And it's a very potent idea. Just as an aside, I want to mention that on my first trip to Russia to visit refuseniks, I had brought with me a number of ketubot. There were many of the refuseniks who did not have anyone to perform their wedding ceremony. And so one of the missions that I had when I went was to perform any of these weddings that they would like to have with a rabbi. And I presented this at a group meeting with a room filled with refuseniks, with couples, and they asked me to wait a moment, and they had a discussion in Russian. Now, I did learn before I went how to read and write Russian and Cyrillic, but not really to understand it, only rudimentary. And so I didn't really know what they were discussing. When they came back, they said to me, Rabbi, we appreciate that you want to do these weddings, but we have an issue. And the issue is that we know that before the wedding, the kala must go to the mikvah. And here in Russia, I was in Moscow at the time, there and St. Petersburg, Leningrad. They said, we can't really, our wives cannot go to the mikvah. It's dangerous to do that. We'll automatically be labeled as spies, can be arrested there. The KGB is there, and they don't really want to let anybody use the mikvah. And therefore, we don't want to go through with the wedding before the going to the mikvah. And I said, I hear that, but I want to tell you there is a rabbinic decision that you are allowed to get married without, if you're unable to go to the mikvah, on the premise that when you do have the opportunity, you will go. But as a kind of a fallback position, you can go to the mikvah. And they said to me, yes, we heard that, but we decided we don't want to have a second class Judaism or halachic loophole in order to go to get married and without going to the mikvah. We want to wait till we can do it 100% with the mikvah. And I was very, very impressed by that was their position. And it reminded me very much of this whole idea of on Hanukkah as well, and the story of the oil that they did use, they didn't use, and the Kohanim saying, we really want to do this without any dilution or watering down of the mitzvah at all. And that's why it's so ironic that Jews worldwide, including Jews who are rather lackadaisical in their observance of Torah and mitzvot, who may not keep kosher, who may not ever open a sefer or even light Shabbat candles, but they enthusiastically embrace Hanukkah. It almost seems self-defeating to celebrate the victory of a pure, unsullied, traditionally loyal Maccabi army while not proclaiming adherence to Torah law. It seems almost, as I say, somewhat contradictory. But I want to give all this a positive spin and to say that deep down, I think all Jews have within us a spark of holiness. It doesn't always flare up, it's not always on display, but this flame, this light is ever present. Hanukkah is sending the message that even the smallest light can grow larger and brighter if it comes from a good place, if it forms any connection whatsoever to Jewish life and tradition. And that is why I suggest Beit Hillel's position is the one that is favored over Beit Shammai, right? We know that Beit Hillel says you start with one single light and work your way up to eight. Beit Shammai says you start with eight and go down to one. We accept the position of Beit Hillel, uh, where this solitary light will grow into a full Chanukiah. One light, I should say, with a second light of the shamas, the flame above it, and that shamash or shamas symbolizes the higher light of Hashem, who is always watching over us, guiding us, protecting us. And that is also why I think most families light not only one Chanukiah, which is the mitzvah, to light one Chanukiah, even with one light for all of Hanukkah. But we have almost universally accepted the custom that we're going to light many lights. Every member of the family generally will light a Chanukiah, and they'll light with ultimately all eight lights, and they do it in a very visible place so the light will shine as brightly as possible. Thus, the term for Chanukah being Chag HaOrim, the holiday of lights, because there are so many lights. And I want to suggest that every Jew who fights to keep Judaism alive by serving as a soldier, of course, who are the modern Maccabim, by studying Torah, by doing chesed for a fellow Jew or for anybody, by proudly identifying as a Jew, either here or abroad, is continuing that battle to keep our flame alive. And that is why our national symbol was chosen to be the Chanukiah, the menorah. It proclaims that we will persevere, we will win the battle for our survival and our eternal existence, which leads me to a final connection I want to suggest between Yosef and Chanuka. The entire book of Bereshit, Sefer Bereshit, has been consumed with dysfunctional intra-family warfare. We start out with Cain's jealousy that leads to the murder of his brother Hevel. Noach's children don't get along. Yishmael and Yitzchak, who are half brothers, they can't live together. Yaakov and Esav, they're twins, but they create this ongoing blood feud. And then Yosef's saga comes to cap this whole syndrome as the brothers contemplate killing him and choose instead to sell him into slavery. But as the Sefer happily ends, Yosef not only makes peace with his siblings, but he supports them and their families for generations. And while Hanukkah also begins with a battle of brothers, it ends with a communal victory and the establishment of this eternal holiday, equally celebrated by all the many streams of Judaism. This is a rare moment of unity in the Jewish community and in the Jewish calendar that is perfectly symbolized by the Chanukiah itself. It has many branches, but only one base. And this, we hope, will be the shape of the Jewish future. This concept of even if we are divided into different branches, nevertheless, we're one people coming from one base that connects all of us together to form this unique light. And this, we hope, will be the light that will light our way for a always positive, productive Jewish future that will ultimately lead to the rebuilding of that Beit HaMikdash and the Geula Shlema, the complete redemption of Am Yisrael soon and in our day. I want to read the prayer for the soldiers and keep them in our thoughts and tefillot every day. Mishaber Chavotenu Abraham Yitzchak Yaakov Hu Yavarech Et Chaylei Tzva Hagana LiYisrael Haomdim Al Mishmar Tzenu Bar Eloheinu Migvul Lebanon Ad Midbar Mitzrayim Min Hayam HaGadol Ad Davar Hava Beyabasha Ba'avir Vayam Yitein Adonai Toivenu Akamim Aleinu Nigafim Lifneihem HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yishmor V'Yatzil Et Chayleinu Mikol Tzara V'Tzukah. ומכל נגע ומחלה וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם, ויתרם כתר ישועה ובתר ניצחון, ויקוים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם, להושיעכם ונאמר אמן. So to everybody, a Shabbat Shalom, a Chanukah Sameach, and enjoy. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will be back in 2 weeks with another commentary on the Parsha. Thanks again to Yossi, our host, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. Stay well. Shenishma B'Sorot Tovot.